Hello, Star Trek fans, and welcome to the Rebinge Deep Space Nine podcast. My name is Kim.
And my name is James.
And we're watching Star Trek Deep Space Nine from the beginning, one episode at a time. Welcome back to the podcast. Today we are on episode 50 of our podcast, a milestone.
Hooray!
Somehow we've managed to be doing this for 50 straight weeks, which is crazy.
Wow, that really is.
And today we are going to be talking about Season 3, Episode 3, entitled The House of Quark.
Also known as Quark the Klingon.
This episode aired October 10th, 1994. Before we talk about this one, anything to say or correct in the previous podcast?
No, it was perfect.
That was The Search Part 2?
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
I have already forgotten many things that happened in that episode.
Yeah.
That's maybe not a great sign, although I did like it.
Yeah, you did.
Yeah.
We've talked about it outside the podcast even.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess too many things are going on and it evaporated.
Time is soup.
Time is soup in the pandemic. All right, well, you want to talk about the House of Quark?
Yes, I do.
Episode 50, here we come.
Hooray!
In the cold open, we open in Quark's bar, and Morn is leaving with a friend.
It's good to see Morn opening an episode.
And then we never see him again, I don't think.
Short and sweet.
Yeah, okay. Quark is bemoaning the lack of business as the place is completely empty except for one Klingon who orders another blood wine.
He quotes Rule of Acquisition 286. When Morn leaves, it's all over.
That wasn't a real rule. He was just joking.
Yes. Rom didn't realize it initially.
Yeah, because Rom's not very smart.
Pell would have gotten the joke instantly.
Or would have said, is that a new rule that I missed? Did they just add that one?
I don't think Pell would miss any new rules or commentaries being added.
Well, if the rules came out like in tweets, maybe she just hadn't checked her phone.
Oh, yeah, I could see the Grand Nagus being someone who uses Twitter a lot.
Oh, yeah. Definitely.
I'm never letting Pell go, by the way.
I'm sorry. So Quark kind of mutters to himself that he should have gone into insurance. Better hours, more money, less scruples, fewer scruples. Quark, get your grammar right. You'd think that the universal translator would get the grammar right. He's annoyed that Sisko didn't cut a deal with the Dominion, allowing them to gain a foothold in the Alpha Quadrant, because now everyone is so terrified of the Dominion that they're not hanging out in the bar, or really in the station at all, as we find.
He's convinced he's going out of business.
Yes. Then the very drunk Klingon is yelling for more wine, but Rom says that he's out of money and is asking for credit. Quark stomps over to the table and starts off all tough, but then he wimps out when the Klingon growls at him.
Well, Quark acts all tough in front of his brother until he gets up to the Klingon and then immediately folds.
Well, he was all tough, too, in the first couple of words, and then the Klingon growled, and he was like, we should talk about a line of credit.
Yes.
Yeah, he's a wuss. The Klingon grabs a knife and drunkenly stumbles towards Quark. Quark manages to hold him off, and they fall down together and kind of roll down a couple of steps. And when Quark shoves the Klingon off of him, we see that the dagger has ended up in the Klingon instead of in Quark. Uh-oh.
Yes.
And we cue the theme song.
So basically, he fell down the stairs and stabbed himself.
Right, he landed on his own knife. That's why weapons and drinking are dangerous.
Well, especially for Klingons.
Well, after the opening, Bashir is scanning the dead Klingon. Not sure why he's doing that, since we already learned in Season 1 that tricorders don't work on dead people.
Yeah.
Anyway, he's scanning, and Odo is hovering. There's a throng of people outside looking in, and Quark thinks this might be good for business. He hatches a plan to tell everyone that he killed the Klingon in a bar fight, in self-defense, of course.
Yep.
Rom is horrified by this plan, but Quark says it's either that or he'll start cutting salaries of employees.
Rom is actually the sensible one in this situation, because he says, this is insane. What happens if his family wants revenge? So he's actually being kind of smart here. You really don't want a Klingon blood feud on your hands. Just ask Jadzia about that.
Well, but Quark is focused on how there's so much attention and a big crowd outside that this is going to be good for business. And that's all that Quark ever cares about.
Oh, that's true.
Until he's threatened.
Yeah, oh, exactly.
Then he wimps out. This makes Rom tell Odo that Quark killed the Klingon in self-defense. Then Quark tells a completely made-up story, putting on a show for the crowd.
Oh, yeah.
Bashir and Odo listen with amusement.
Yeah, he is ridiculous. And clearly gawking is still a pastime in the future.
Yeah, right.
The look on Bashir's face while Quark is spinning his ridiculous tale is priceless.
Yeah, he's kind of smiling.
Yeah.
Now we go to the O'Brien quarters, and Miles comes in complaining about his crappy day. But then he finds out Keiko was forced to close the school because the last of her Bajoran students evacuated the station with their families, and all she has left are Nog and Jake. Keiko is putting on a brave face, but she seems disappointed that her life has lost its purpose again, and Miles looks pretty concerned.
He seems very genuine here. He does look really concerned about what's happened to her.
Well, he doesn't want to go back to fighting like they were doing early in season 1 before she had the school.
Yeah.
So, yeah, he's worried.
I think they should have discussed this earlier.
Yeah, that is in my notes. Yes, we will get to that. Quarks is now bustling with customers, and Quark looks very pleased with himself as Odo stands at the bar glaring at him. Odo has come to tell him that the Klingon he killed was named Kozak, a thoroughly disreputable character who was the head of a very powerful family and someone who's likely to turn up asking questions. Quark sticks to his story, but Rom is terrified.
Yeah.
Quark says he's not changing his story now because he has a reputation as a slayer of Klingons. He says he struck a blow for Ferengi everywhere. If the Klingon family comes to the station, his plan is to pay them off, which does not seem like a good plan when it comes to the Klingons. I think he's in for some trouble.
It's very Ferengi, though. From their point of view, that's probably a good plan.
Yeah, something immediately to show off, I guess.
I think he's letting it get to his head. He's starting to believe his own tall tale.
Oh, sure.
It's Quark, slayer of Klingons.
But what's funny is in the very next scene, he gets his wish because Kozak's brother arrives and grabs Quark in a dark hallway. Quark starts to tell the brother about what really happened, but the Klingon says if his brother died by accident, it would bring dishonor to his whole family, and he would hold Quark responsible. An honorable death requires no vengeance. So Quark figures it out in his head very quickly and sticks to his original story.
Yes. This should have been a red flag to Quark. This Klingon insisting that he died in combat, that maybe he should have done a little bit more looking into it.
Quark does not make good decisions under duress.
Very true.
He makes butt-saving decisions under duress.
Oh, and the actor, he completely gets being a Klingon. Great performance.
Yeah, he was good. He had the look for sure.
Oh, yeah. I think when you play a Klingon, there's almost a melodramatic side to it. You have to sort of chew the scenery. Yeah.
Back to the O'Briens now, and Miles is in his one non-uniform outfit, which is that blue shirt with gray trousers that he was wearing in the Tribunal episode.
There's only a couple of times Miles is actually allowed to be out of uniform. One is when he's on trial for his life on Cardassia.
Right.
The other one is when he's hiding in conduits from Bajoran security services. And the final one is when he's on a Cardassian-controlled planet pretending to be a pimp.
Yes, from the beginning of season 2.
Yeah.
Well, also when he's trying to seduce his own wife. That seems to be the other time when he wears this particular outfit. This is obviously his sexy outfit. It is.
You know, I would never describe Miles O'Brien as sexy, but, you know, whatever.
Sure, he's sexy to his wife. Come on. Remember on that episode, Tribunal?
Yes.
He was wearing that outfit and they were making that joke about whether or not the seats went back on the shuttle. It made us very uncomfortable.
As you described it, awkward.
It was very awkward. But, you know, I'm not his wife. So if his wife's into that, then that probably works for them.
Oh, okay. That's true.
Because here he is in his sexy outfit and he's prepared a fancy dinner for Keiko. So when she comes home from wherever she was, because there's no school, so I don't know where she was, but he pops open some champagne and they have a little date night.
Oh.
And all this was very lovely until later when Miles is leaving for work and she kind of sadly says, well, I'll be here, and flops down on the sofa.
Oh, that was really sad.
It was. Miles doesn't quite know what to do with that, and he just heads out to work and leaves her there.
Yeah, despite everything, she just seems kind of depressed.
She's definitely depressed and listless and has no purpose and doesn't feel like she's using her brain.
Yeah.
And by the way, where's the kid? Did they say where the kid was? Was she with the...
Petersons?
What's that? Is it the Petersons?
Yes.
The family that she's with all the time.
Right.
Now we go to Quark's and he's counting his money in a closed bar when a shadowy figure enters. Quark needs to figure out how to lock the door or something because he's always getting into trouble in this exact situation. How many times has somebody come in when the bar is closed and he's counting his money and they just sneak in and they shoot him or they stab him?
I think he should at the very least employ some security during the counting process.
Something. Yeah, get Morn to stand there.
That would be a good idea. Morn's kind of a big guy.
Yeah. Well, the woman in the robe is a Klingon and her name is Grilka, Kozak's wife. She asks him if Kozak's death was honorable, and Quark says, absolutely. She pulls out a big dagger and says, well, then defend yourself.
That was a really big knife as well.
Oh, yeah.
Very Klingon
Well,
knife.
the Klingons don't do anything small. And he cowers behind the bar, which makes her demand the truth of what really happened.
Yeah, he jumps over the bar, falls over, and is lying on the floor, holding the tray up.
Yes. Quark then tells her the true story.
Yeah, she says, you must be quite a liar. And he says, it's a gift. Well, it's somewhat. He's not normally that great of a liar.
No, he's not usually a great liar. In fact, it took him several times to get to this lie and accept it. So, she's just come along when the story has stuck. Also, in this scene here, I notice he's got a new purple jacket, I suppose, for season 3. It's very nice. It's very dark purple. But then in the next scene, I think maybe the lighting has changed or something, but now it looks red. I greatly prefer how it looked purple in the bar.
Yeah.
Well, Grilka then stabs Quark in the neck with some kind of hypo spray. I think that's what it is. And then he beams herself and Quark out of the bar, leaving a bunch of latinum on the bar just sitting there. I hope somebody comes and picks that up.
Morn.
Or Rom. Hopefully somebody puts it in the safe.
Oh, yeah.
Well, when Quark comes to, like I said, now his jacket is all weird and red when it was purple before. I think it's just the lighting. But he wakes up with an older Klingon staring down at him. And the old dude tells him he's on Kronos now, in the ancestral home of what used to be the House of Kozak. But Kozak died without a male heir, so the house has no name.
So question here. Isn't DS9 a long way from Kronos?
Yeah, they got there real fast. And he didn't wake up the whole time. I mean, that's that whole time and space thing, right? That is very, I don't know, loosey-goosey.
Well, from my research, it should, in theory, take at least 12 days to get to Kronos.
And I read on Memory Alpha that there was a scene that was cut where shortly after this, Quark calls Rom and they have a conversation that he's been gone for a couple of days, but definitely not 12. But they cut that anyway, so that didn't even happen. So when you watch the show, it just seems like it was a few minutes or hours.
Right.
But somehow he just comes to when they get there. I don't know. Maybe they put him in stasis.
Yeah, it could have been,
Right.
But from further reading, apparently the time it takes to travel places varies entirely on the requirements of the story.
Yeah, right. Well, Quark asks how the house can have no name because of the brother, but the brother has apparently been a sworn enemy of the house for 7 generations.
Once again, Quark is easily fooled. It was not his brother.
Yeah, I was fooled. I thought it was his brother. I'm still confused about that part of the story. Doesn't matter. Anyway, it turns out that if Kozak had died by an accident without an heir, the council may have allowed Grilka to become head of the family. But since he supposedly died in an honorable battle, the house will fall. And is this Downton Abbey? How did we go back to where women can't own property?
But it's good to see that the Klingons reinforce gender roles.
Ugh, so gross. That really annoyed me. Well, and we just had this conversation about Klingons, it was a couple of episodes ago, about how the armor is made just to fit the body type, remember? And we were saying, so maybe they don't get stuck in the gender roles that we're stuck in, but then we do this, and oh, great, we're stuck in a gender role. Yeah. Well, Grilka comes in and gives Quark some fancy robe to put on. She grabs Quark's hand and starts saying some Klingon and tells Quark to repeat the words that she's saying. Quark tries to get out of whatever is happening, but she holds her dagger to his throat. So, of course, he gives in immediately and repeats the words, and then she kisses him and spits. And guess what? Now we're married. I mean, you saw that coming like a mile away. Only Quark didn't see that coming.
I like how direct to the point she is. I keep thinking of the Nagus. Remember he was complaining and saying, it's like talking to a Klingon.
I remember him saying it. I just don't remember the context of what was being said to him.
Yeah, it was because he was annoyed at his son.
And said it was like talking to a Klingon. Okay.
What's funny is, even though she seems to find kissing Quark repulsive, they both seem to share the same dentist.
Oh, yeah. There was some nasty teeth. I think I made a note of that later when we get a really good look at their teeth at the same time. And it's just like, ugh, that is gross.
Yeah.
It's hard to look at that as romantic in any way when it's just disgusting teeth on disgusting teeth. It's gross.
Too funny.
We go back to the station now, and Miles enters Sisko's office for a private chat. But he finds that he's having a meeting with Dax and Kira. Dax, with no personal boundaries, says, "Wife problems, Chief."
Yep.
I laughed out loud when she said that. Was so funny.
Remember Dax's podcast? Inappropriate Discussions.
That is right. Well, that was funny.
Dax's hair is back to normal, though.
It is. That's nice. Dax and Kira leave so that he can talk to Sisko. Sisko figures that Keiko is upset about the school, but Miles says she's acting like she doesn't care, and he wants to try converting one of the cargo bays into an arboretum to give her something else to focus on. Sisko agrees immediately. He understands how hard it is to deal with a loved one who is unhappy. He hopes this works, and so does Miles, because he knows that she sacrificed her entire career for him.
It is good to see how Sisko seems to show an understanding of Miles's predicament and of Keiko's problem of not effectively having a career on the station.
I don't know that he understood that she didn't have a career. He was just willing to give up a cargo bay that wasn't being used for anything.
That had faulty ODN relays.
Yeah, so I don't know. Did he really understand?
I think so.
The person who ends up understanding later almost makes no sense, but we'll get there.
I think he was understanding because even at the end of the scene, he looked a little skeptical. Like he knew this wouldn't necessarily work.
Okay. Well, you have a high opinion of Sisko. We go back to the Klingon homeworld, and Dagor is claiming the fallen house in the Great Hall. We see Gowran, who is about to grant this request, when Grilka comes in to dispute the petition.
Yay, Gowran!
She brings in Querk and cites some Klingon ritual called Brektal that says if someone dies in honorable combat, the victor can take his place and his wife. She points out that Dagor made this possible by certifying that Querk was the one to kill her husband. She's simply exercising her rights.
She seems to have nicely outmaneuvered Dagor here.
Yeah, and then he says he will have her house and her title, and he'll put her head and Quark's head outside the gate. When Dagor threatens Querk, Gowran steps in and stops him and says the council will consider the matter carefully. Until the decision is made, the House of Kozak will now be known as the House of Quark. And Querk corrects him that it's Quark. Oh, that made me laugh.
Gowran's cloak in this scene is just excellent, by the way.
He has so many medals and pins on it. It's really cool. Yeah, it's very ornate.
Yeah, and the shoulder pad things that he had that are, again, metal and ornate. Very good.
Yep.
So there is a little bit of a continuity issue here. When it shows Gowran, and he says he'll respect the Brektal, he's wearing the cloak and has all the medals on it and everything. And the camera cuts to Grilka and Dagor. Then it comes back to Gowran for the second part of his speech. And all of a sudden, his coat is gone. And he's just wearing the normal Klingon leather outfit. And there's no longer any guy standing behind him.
Oh, wow. I didn't even notice that.
I was fixated on how cool the cloak was.
Whoops. Wow. Yeah, I missed that. Back at the House of Quark.
Oh, very good.
Quark wonders what the next step is, but Grilka has been making up this plan as she goes. Turns out Kozak was a gambler and a drunk, and because of that, the house has been severely weakened in power and influence.
So he was a good, close friend of Curzon.
Much of the debt is owed to Dagor. If he gains control of the house, he will have too much power. Quark asks to see the financials of the house and of Dagor. Grilka is like, that's not how we do things on Kronos, but Quark talks her into it.
Seeing as Quark figures out that she doesn't actually have a plan, this is probably a good change.
Yeah. Now we go to the Replimat, and Miles asks for Bashir's opinion on his plans for an arboretum.
This was so surprising. Julian comes into the Replimat, and he can clearly see what Miles is working on. Every opportunity to be the annoying Bashir we've seen in the past and give his comment, but he doesn't actually say anything.
No.
And Miles is the one who volunteers it to Bashir.
But he is looking over his shoulder.
Yeah, but he keeps quiet.
Yeah, true.
Clearly you can see he sort of holds himself back.
Well, and then Miles asks for his opinion, which seems to surprise him. And then he sits down and he asks if this is meant to make Keiko happy, and Miles says yes, but Bashir says it will probably only work for a few months, because trying to turn her profession into a hobby is probably not the answer. It was almost wise.
Yeah, he explains you have to solve the underlying problem. Who is this guy?
I don't know. Nobody we've met.
One of the Dominion, one of the founders, has actually replaced Bashir.
Well, the founders aren't good at faces, so probably not. But
as far as you know.
As far as I know. But yeah, he is all of a sudden being useful.
Yeah, it's surprising level of emotional maturity from Bashir that they haven't shown to this point. Not that I'm complaining. I love that they're turning Bashir into the character that fans of the show enjoy.
Yeah, it's just hard to believe. It's hard to believe that all of a sudden he has emotional intelligence when he hasn't had it for the entire 2 seasons before. He had little hints where he seemed like a human.
Yes.
But mostly he's been annoying and a terrible friend. Back at House of Quark, Quark is going through the books. In this scene, he's taken off the fancy Klingon robes and also his purple jacket, and he's got this green vest over a silver shirt, and he looks like an old-time accountant.
I think that was the idea.
I think it was. It was very funny, and here he was going over the books. Well, anyway, he finds that Dagor has manipulated the family holdings and devalued their land. He can see that Dagor has been systematically weakening the family's holdings for 5 years. She's very annoyed that he's been scheming and plotting like a Ferengi.
Yes.
There's no honor in what he's done, she says. She asks if he can prove it to the council, and he says he just needs to talk them through it. She says she's very grateful, and she leans in, saying she's so grateful she won't shatter every bone in his body for putting his hand on her thigh. And then they kind of laugh. This is where all the teeth were visible, and it was like, oh, too much teeth, too much.
There was a ridiculous amount of very bad teeth in this.
Because it's not just the sort of jaggedy, awful teeth, but they are not the right color for teeth. It is gross.
It probably would make a dentist cry.
We go to the Great Hall, and Quark is now trying to talk the Klingons through the numbers, and they're all clicking away on these little pads and looking very confused. Gowran eventually gets annoyed and just throws his pad down. He doesn't want to hear anything anymore.
I think reading financial statements does not seem very Klingon.
Not a lot of honor in it.
And I have the feeling that Quark is one of those people who makes PowerPoint slides with like 30 items on each page.
Well, especially if he's doing his usual thing of trying to show how smart he is, he's probably just way over talking it.
Yeah.
You know, he probably could have done the whole thing with one PowerPoint slide and a chart.
Yes.
I'm sure he's obfuscated it and he's just made it so confusing that they don't care.
Exactly.
Well, Gowran gets into Gor's face and says, "A charge has been made that you've used money to bring down a great house."
His awesome cloak's back too.
Good. Dagor denies it. He says he has proof that Kozak died in an accident, and he drags in Rom.
Hello, brother.
Now that Quark's been accused of lying, they have to fight to the death because of some Klingon-y reason.
Oh, dear.
I was worried as soon as I saw Rom because nothing ever goes well when Rom is involved.
Well, yes.
Hey. Now it's nighttime, and Rom and Quark are trying to sneak out, but Grilka catches them. She's annoyed that Ferengi have no sense of honor, and she thought Quark was different. She just tells them to leave, and they do, although Quark does seem to have second thoughts.
I do like her dig at Quark as well. He has no heart, just a piece of latinum, and a small one at that.
And a small one.
That's gotta hurt for a Ferengi.
Oh.
I also liked when she said they could leave, the big Klingon who was blocking their way, he pushes past them and he growls. That was a very Klingon thing to do. Do we ever hear his name?
No. I don't think we ever hear that guy's name, or who he is. I thought it was like her father or something, but I read somewhere that he was a servant in the house, and like...
He was the retainer of the house Kozak.
I see. The head butler? Well, we are stuck in historical England in Downton Abbey time, so it would make sense that we would have a head butler.
Oh, that sounds like a good explanation, yeah, okay.
The next day in the Great Hall, they're waiting for Quark. When it appears that he isn't going to show up, Dagor tries to claim victory since Quark has wimped out. But in comes Quark with Rom behind him. Grilka is very happy to see him.
Yeah, they both walk in at the last minute, of course, and Quark gets in a dig at Dagor by saying, "Son of whatever." That's a burn for a Klingon right there.
Yeah, that definitely was. You could almost feel those other Klingons standing around just going, ooh, burn.
Ooh. He's mean.
Well, Grilka is very happy to see him. But when the battle starts, Quark throws down his batleth. The Klingons are all confused because it needs to be an honorable battle. But Quark says, this is just an execution. So if that's what you want, that's all you're going to get. No honor, no glory. And when you tell your children and your grandchildren, I hope you remember to tell them how you heroically killed an unarmed Ferengi who is half your size. Dagor doesn't care and starts to attack, but Gowran stops him. He says he didn't want to believe the things Quark said about him, but now it's clear that he has no honor, and he has no place in this hall.
You have no honor.
And then he dramatically crosses his arms and turns away from Dagor, which is apparently a symbol of something because all the other members of the council do the same thing, and Dagor is dragged out.
The thing we see here is the full-on Gowran scary eyes.
Oh, yes, we do see that a couple of times, yes.
That is one of the things that this actor just nails with Gowran. If you notice, what he kind of does is he keeps his head tilted forward. So he's always sort of looking up, and it really makes the whites of his eyes jump out. It's obviously a technique, something he's developed that really makes Gowran stand out.
Well, it works.
Oh, yeah.
Gowran calls Quark brave and helps him up, and then he says Grilka can have her special dispensation and lead her own house.
A brave Ferengi? Who would have thought it possible?
Yeah, right. Grilka asks Quark how she can repay him, and he asks for a divorce and says, no offense. She says, none taken, slaps him, and then spits on him, saying, well, now you're a free man. And then she kisses him and says, Kapla!
Son of Keldar.
Rom is standing there, shocked by the entire thing. That was the best part of the whole scene.
Well, for Ferengi, this doesn't require any lawyers, so it's obviously cheap as well.
That's true. We go back to Quark's bar, and Miles and Keiko are having a drink. Miles tells her that he's learned about an agrobiology expedition leaving for the Janitsa Mountains on Bajor in 2 weeks. Apparently, they need a chief botanist. The expedition is expected to last for 6 months. She protests, saying she can't be away from Miles and Molly for that long, but he says you can take Molly with you.
I'm really impressed with this. Miles has finally realized that his partner needs to follow her career too.
Took long enough.
Yeah.
Well, she says they made an agreement when they came to the station together, but he says he really needs her to be happy. Bajor is only 3 hours away by runabout, and he tells her to go and be the best botanist in the galaxy.
I thought that was a nice touch.
Yeah, they just should have had this conversation sooner. They should have expected that she couldn't just come there and do nothing. They had to make some kind of a plan. I don't blame one person or the other for it. The two of them together needed to make a better decision and have a better conversation. She should have owned up to the fact that she couldn't just go to the station and just sit in their quarters all the time. That doesn't make any sense.
Right.
But yeah, they should have had this conversation 2 years ago.
That, to me, with two very smart people, seems surprisingly odd.
Yeah. It also seems weird that you'd take your tiny toddler on an expedition to the mountains.
Well, I think it would depend on how dangerous it was.
Yeah.
This might literally just be like an extended camping trip.
That's true. And they couldn't leave Molly behind because, oh man, in the 90s, forget it.
Oh, yeah.
The kid would have to go with the mom. Plus, what's Miles going to do? He would need full-time babysitting because he's got a job too, so.
What are the Petersons doing?
Yeah, good question. Molly's going to miss whatever's going on at that house. I guess they're only going for 6 months.
Yeah.
Well, meanwhile, down on the first level, Quark and Rom are sitting at the bar. Quark is lamenting business dropping off again, and Rom says money isn't everything. You can't buy respect. Quark says respect is good, but Latinum is better. And then Rom asks him to tell the story of the Great Hall again.
Yeah, and Quark tells him he's taking this time out of his paycheck.
Well, Quark launches into his dramatic story again, which I'm sure is embellished in many ways.
Oh, yeah.
And the episode ends.
So I'm wondering here, is part of the story that these two Ferengi are learning that respect is worth something, that it's worth having?
Well, Rom seemed to learn it, but I'm not sure Quark learned it.
Well, we've talked before about the Ferengi and how insular they are. And even though they do business all over the place, they still pretty much stick to themselves. And you're seeing Quark and Rom basically being forced to have more exposure to a wider world. Is this causing them to evolve? I mean, you've talked about how on earth does a race evolve if they wall themselves off. Are we seeing that evolution with these two in the story? And it's changing them. So some of their values are starting to progress. Like all of a sudden, they've discovered that maybe respect is something worth having. That, to me, seems very Star Trek.
Well, I think we'll have to see more than one episode of it to think that they're actually evolving in some way. This is not a Quark we've seen before. So if, if he has learned something and this is actually an evolution of the character, that's great. But it's got to be in more than one episode for it to be a true evolution. Otherwise, it's maybe just questionable writing. Kind of like how we had in Profit and Loss, where that version of Quark made no sense. It still doesn't make any sense.
I don't think it made sense in the position of the season that it was in. If you'd moved it before Pell, I think it would have made more sense.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. It still would have seemed strange that Quark had the ability to have this great love of his life and that he was willing to give up everything for her. This was actually a much easier thing to believe.
Yeah.
Because he was trying to save his own skin.
Oh, ultimately, yes.
And the only way he was going to get out of there was by helping her. He had no other way out. So it made sense that he would try to do something. The fact that he was maybe embellishing his story to the council, that also kind of made sense.
Well, that is a Klingon tradition as well.
Right. This did seem like growth for Quark. But my point is it has to be more than just this one episode for it to truly be growth.
Agreed.
So do you have any other overanalysis?
Well, I have a few small things.
Okay.
The first one is, so Grilka, as the head of a major Klingon house or an important Klingon house,
Yeah.
even if it has fallen on slightly harder times,
Yeah.
why is she just wearing civilian-looking clothes? Why isn't she wearing, like, a full Klingon outfit? Like, remember Kira's Minder in Crossover?
With the pigtails?
Yeah. And the full Klingon armor?
Yeah.
That would be more her. I mean, at the other extreme, you've got the boob window suits from the Duras sisters.
Yeah. The Minder may have just been wearing military garb. I don't The Duras sisters, I don't know. I don't remember what their position was, but also if those were military looks. Whereas Grilka didn't seem like she was trying to be the head of a military house in any way. And she wasn't the head of the house until the very end, until that very last scene. We don't actually see her after that. So maybe once she becomes the true head of the house, after the special dispensation has been granted, maybe she does then have fancy robes after that, but we just don't see it. Fancy robes or a fancy outfit or something.
Yeah. She gets the military outfit and the full cloak with medals.
Right.
Okay, I'll accept that. That's a good answer.
Okay.
The next thing, onto Degar. If Kozak was a disreputable Klingon, I'm surprised that Degar didn't find some way or some excuse to take over his house by personal combat. I mean, deliberately provoke a fight with Kozak over, some triviality. So I'm guessing part of this is Degar is a coward and that he really doesn't have honor. And that even though Kozak was a drunk or was not very capable as a Klingon, Degar was still too frightened to actually face him in combat. I feel they could have dealt with that in the story a little more.
Yeah. I don't really know what the rules are. Can anybody just challenge anybody for their head of their house? I don't know. Is that how that works? I didn't get the pamphlet about how that works in Klingon.
I assume if there'd been some insult against Degar calling his honor into question, it could have been settled in a personal battle or something, kind of like what happened here. And Degar seems smart enough that he could have manufactured an insult so they'd end up in a fight kind of thing.
Well, maybe he knew he couldn't beat him.
That's what I'm thinking. He really was without honor.
Yeah, I guess he could have just gotten him drunk since that seemed easy to do and done the same thing that ended up happening to him.
Yeah.
But yeah, they could have explained that a little better.
And this leads on to the Klingon Council.
Right.
I would expect Gowran, as the leader, would have been able to evaluate what Quark had presented on his own. So after Quark had done this very poor presentation, he could have had his people maybe look at this, examine the numbers and go, hey, he was trying to take a house down by using money, especially if this guy was ultimately trying to get on the council. Shouldn't they do like a background check?
Yeah.
I thought Gowran would have done more due diligence, as it were, after these allegations.
Well, but Grilka made that point of saying, this isn't how we do it on Kronos, like looking at the books.
Oh.
I wonder if that's why they had her say that.
Okay.
Like we don't really dig into the details of these things.
Yeah.
Which is funny because that probably means there's so much of it going on if nobody ever looks into it.
Right.
Yeah.
Because Gowran specifically says, I didn't want to believe it. Well, the truth's in front of you.
Right.
So, yeah, I think you're right. And that's a good way of them explaining it by her saying, oh, we don't do it that way. Yeah. Well, maybe you should consider getting a couple of Ferengi and keeping them on the payroll.
Yeah, that's a good idea, actually. Just have a couple of Ferengi in the back checking the books. Just keep your eye on this.
And my final point, which might lead into your section, is I think it's kind of funny how these alien races seem to have very traditional gender roles. I'm guessing part of it is network TV in the 90s couldn't be too radical with all that feminist kind of stuff.
Well, geez, even in the 90s, women could own property. Yeah, it's my first note in Women of the Future. It's like we fell all the way back to pre-20s, like on Downton Abbey, when the woman couldn't inherit the property of her family because, God forbid, she was a woman and she wasn't married, which was so sad and pathetic. I mean, that's like a late example of it. There are obviously much earlier examples in all kinds of British literature and in British history where women were just not allowed to own property. It kind of bothered me. If they had done that a little bit differently and talked about, like, maybe she had married into that family or something so that it was the family's money and not her line by blood or so. There were so many things they could have said rather than just this. Like, oh, the wife can't inherit. It's like, come on. Yeah, I agree that was obnoxious.
That wraps it up. Over to you, Cam.
Well, if we go to women in the future, I'll skip my first point since we just talked about it. But my second point is that the character of Grilka was played by Mary Kay Adams, who played one of my very favorite soap opera characters of all time. So it was so funny to see her here. I didn't quite recognize her with those crazy eyebrows that she had going on and obviously those terrible teeth.
Those eyebrows were something.
Yeah, but she was good. A very smooth Klingon combination of anger and honor.
Yeah.
I thought she was great.
Well, I think everybody who played a Klingon in this episode really got the role.
Yeah. Yes, that's very true. I'm not sure what else to say about this Keiko story. It felt a little bit like Miles being the hero, which just left this bad taste in my mouth.
Yeah.
I suppose it's good that Bashir actually showed some emotional intelligence, that we haven't seen before. That's great.
Yeah.
But ultimately, why would they move there with no plan for her? It's very frustrating and demeaning for that character to have had no plan. I read that this was the juncture where they kind of wrote her out for 6 months so that they could build up the relationship between Miles and Bashir.
Yeah.
Which, let me just tell you that that's maybe even more insulting. It implies that the man can't have friends because he has a wife.
Interesting.
That's frickin' worse than just let him have a friend. Why can't he have a friend? I don't understand that. People have friends. I don't like the way they deal with that relationship.
That's interesting. I did not know that about the show. Well, do you think that some of that's been driven by the fact, not that it's simply his wife's not there, but that Miles needs a close friend and Bashir is filling that role? And it's almost like he becomes a friend through accident rather than design.
Yeah, without Keiko there's something that he's missing. There's something lacking in his life, and so he needs somebody to fill it in.
Right.
Yeah, fills a void that Miles has, yeah. But they could have done that in a lot of different ways. I think it's possible to build up friendships at work. You do bond with people. Like if they would go on away missions and actually work together to solve problems. I build bonds with the people that I work with all the time because you have conversations with them. You spend hours every day with them. It doesn't mean that the life that I have with my spouse isn't just as important. It seems like someone who doesn't understand relationships. It seems like many times when I complain about the lack of emotional intelligence in characters, I'm pretty sure I'm complaining about the lack of emotional intelligence in the people who write and create the show.
That's probably a very good point. The individuals writing it don't have those experiences.
Which is sad, because the teamwork is the best work.
Okay, yeah, I see what you're saying there.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's what I read on Memory Alpha. So there was that, and then there was very little Kira, which was a bummer, and very little Dax. But Dax did have the funniest line of the whole episode.
Well, they fixed her hair, at least.
In her inappropriate behavior. And they did fix her hair, so that was good, yeah.
I think you're right. Dax needs to do a podcast.
Yeah. But otherwise, I don't have anything else in Women in the Future. So I'm going to go to rating. Thumbs up, thumbs down, or neutral. What is your rating?
I'm giving this a thumbs up because at the end of the day, it was a good Klingon episode.
I agree. I also give it a thumbs up. Yeah, I didn't like the stuff that went on with Miles and Keiko. And you and I mentioned it to each other in passing after we both watched the episode. And I knew as soon as you mentioned it that we weren't going to look at it in the same way because I found it irksome and demeaning. And you were like, oh, this is a great little side story that they had. And I just thought, okay. But besides that, I actually quite liked the episode. And this is the best version of Quark that we've seen. This is the first time I've actually felt that he was kind of likable as a character. He didn't have to be a great guy or a hero to become likable, but they just have made him such an idiot before. And from his point of view, the butt of a lot of jokes. But, he made a bunch of pretty smart moves in this episode, including being smart enough to look into the books of the Klingon families. And so that was good. And also, he didn't just run away to save his skin in the end, which I think the Ferengis have always done. That's maybe not completely believable there that he would put his head on the chopping block like that, because we have seen him be really cowardly. And that was an act of bravery that he kind of took on faith that this guy isn't going to chop my head off because that would not be an act of honor, when he had to believe that there were going to be some Klingons who wouldn't act out of honor. So I think that was a risk, maybe one step too far, but I'm okay with it. I still liked it. It was an enjoyable episode.
Well, that's kind of the point that maybe the Ferengi are starting to evolve. These Ferengi are starting to evolve because of their experiences.
Well, let's see. Let's see what happens in the next Quark episode.
I think the final thing I take away from this episode is I can feel a tonal change happening in the show.
Well, let's see if it lasts. I was feeling that way at the beginning of season 2 as well, where those first 3 episodes were so good. And then we even had a couple of times between Invasive Procedures and Melora where we both were like, hey, this is not the Bashir we're used to. And then he slipped back into his bad habits again. So I think we have to have a couple of episodes where this sticks. If we can get through a good story arc or get through, 4 or 5 episodes where that seems to be true, I think that would be good. We just haven't had it stick long enough yet.
Yeah.
All right, well, that does it for Season 3, Episode 3. Come back next week for Episode 4 and episode number 51. In the meantime, if you'd like to send us your own over-analysis of this or any episode, or if you just want to say something nice, you can always email us at ReBingeIT@gmail.com, or you can tweet us at ReBingeIT. Check us out on TalkThroughMedia.com. You can leave feedback there for individual episodes of the podcast, and you can also listen to all of the other cool podcasts in our network.
Thanks for joining us on the Rebinge Deep Space Nine podcast.
That's it for me.
And that's it for me.